Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. In an age when every moment can be captured with a simple tap on a phone screen, there was once a time when photographs were precious, deliberate creations. The year 1912, a time of rigid social customs, when the Titanic sank beneath icy waters, and the world stood on the precipice of the First World War. Among the artifacts of this era, wedding photographs held particular significance. They were carefully composed tableaus, marking not just the union of two people, but often the merging of families, fortunes, and futures. The subjects would sit perfectly still, faces composed into expressions of dignified solemnity, every detail of their appearance meticulously arranged for an image that would likely stand as the only professional photograph they might ever possess. Such is the image before us, a wedding portrait from 1912 that at first glance appears to be the very epitome of Edwardian propriety. The groom stands tall and proud in his dark suit, his posture military straight, his face a mask of appropriate seriousness for such a momentous occasion. The bride beside him is a vision in white, her dress an elaborate construction of lace and satin, high-necked and proper, trailing to the floor in a modest train. Her hair is arranged beneath a veil that frames her pale face, and in her gloved hands she holds a bouquet of white roses and lilies. But something lies beneath those pristine blooms, something that should not be there. It wasn't noticed, not at first, perhaps not for decades after the photograph was taken. The image likely sat in albums, passed down through generations, admired for its beauty and historical charm. How many eyes glanced over it, seeing only a perfect representation of matrimonial bliss from a bygone era. Yet once seen, it cannot be unseen, the object partially concealed beneath the flowers in the bride's hands. Not fully hidden, as though she wanted it to be visible, but not so obvious as to draw immediate attention. Was it a message, a warning, a token of something darker that lurked beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect union? The bride's expression offers few clues. Her lips form the slightest of smiles, common for photographs of this period when exposures were long and smiles difficult to maintain. But her eyes, there's something in them that seems at odds with the joyous occasion. Is there fear lurking in that gaze? Resignation? Or something more calculating? The photograph raises countless questions. What was this object that the bride felt compelled to carry with her wedding flowers on what should have been the happiest day of her life? Was the groom aware of its presence? Did the photographer notice this unusual addition to the traditional bridal ensemble? And perhaps most disturbingly, what happened to this couple after the camera captured this moment? Did they live long, happy lives together? Or did the object beneath those flowers presage something more sinister in their future? Our research into this haunting image began with a chance discovery at an estate sale in western Massachusetts. The photograph had been stored in a cedar chest, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper, alongside other family mementos, birth announcements, funeral cards, and brittle newspaper clippings. The name, Eleanor Winters, was written in faded ink on the back, along with the date, June 7, 1912. Initial inquiries led us to county marriage records, where we discovered that Eleanor Winters had indeed married Thomas Hargrove that spring day. Thomas, we learned, had been the only son of a prosperous banking family, while Eleanor came from more modest means, her father a clockmaker, her mother a seamstress. Deeper investigation revealed disquieting details about their union. The local newspaper had announced the engagement with surprisingly little fanfare for such a socially advantageous match. More telling was what we discovered in Thomas's personal correspondence, preserved in his family's archives. A letter to a university friend expressing reservations about the hastiness of the wedding arrangements. "It has all been decided with such speed," Thomas wrote, "that I scarce have had time to catch my breath. Eleanor insists the ceremony must take place before midsummer, though I had hoped to establish myself more firmly at Father's Bank first." What could have prompted such urgency? The answer emerged when we cross-referenced dates. Eleanor and Thomas's first child, a daughter named Margaret, arrived a mere 7 months after the wedding, a circumstance that would have caused significant scandal in 1912. Yet this common predicament doesn't explain the unsettling object partially visible beneath Eleanor's bridal bouquet. Enhanced examination of the photograph reveals it to be a small pistol, a lady's derringer, likely silver-plated, its handle ornately engraved. Why would a bride conceal a firearm among her wedding flowers? The question led us to court records and private journals that painted a troubling portrait of Thomas Hargrove. Despite his polished public persona, he had a history of violent outbursts. Two former household servants had quietly left the Hargrove estate after incidents described euphemistically in town gossip as disagreements, and a former fiancé had broken their engagement under mysterious circumstances. Eleanor's own diary, discovered in her granddaughter's attic in Vermont, offers illumination. An entry dated 3 weeks before the wedding reads, "Its temper showed itself again today. Mother says I must reconsider, but what choice remains for me now? Aunt Martha has given me something to keep me safe, should the need arise. I pray it never shall." The marriage lasted only 4 years. Thomas Hargrove died in 1916, not in the trenches of Europe as many young men did that year, but at home from what was officially recorded as an accidental discharge of a sporting firearm. Eleanor never remarried, raising their daughter and managing a small but successful millinery shop until her death in 1952. The photograph captures more than a moment in time. It documents a woman's quiet determination to protect herself, even on a day meant to celebrate love and commitment, in an era when women had few protections under the law and even fewer avenues of escape. The photograph's discovery prompted an exhibition at the Berkshire Historical Society, where it caught the attention of Dr. Sophia Chen, a specialist in early 20th century family dynamics and domestic violence. Her analysis offered new insights into Eleanor's circumstances. What's remarkable about this image is not just the hidden weapon, but its deliberate partial visibility, Dr. Chen explained. In an era when women were legally considered their husband's property, Eleanor was making a statement, perhaps to Thomas himself, perhaps to whoever might later view the photograph. She was establishing a boundary. This interpretation gained credibility when we uncovered correspondence between Eleanor and her Aunt Martha from April 1912. Martha Winters, it emerged, had herself escaped an abusive marriage in 1893, a scandalous action for that time. The older woman had reinvented herself as a seamstress in Providence, never remarrying but maintaining her independence through skilled labor. "The silver piece is yours now," Martha wrote to Eleanor. "It was my companion through dark nights, though I never had cause to use it. Sometimes knowledge of its presence is enough to give one courage." The silver derringer had a history of its own. Manufacturing records traced it to a Philadelphia gunsmith who specialized in ladies' protection firearms during the 1880s, discreet weapons marketed to women who traveled alone or managed businesses in an era when female independence invited danger. The small pistol represented both vulnerability and resistance, a complex symbol of Eleanor's precarious position. Perhaps most poignant was what we discovered in the family Bible, preserved by Margaret Hargrove's descendants. Pressed between pages detailing births and deaths was a dried white rose, presumably from Eleanor's wedding bouquet. Alongside it, a scrap of paper bearing Eleanor's handwriting. "What others see as weakness may become strength. Remember this, Margaret, should dark days find you." Town records revealed that after Thomas's death, rumors circulated briefly about the nature of the accident. The coroner's report noted powder burns inconsistent with self-infliction, but the investigation was cursory. Thomas's father, leveraging his influence, ensured the matter was quickly settled. Eleanor never spoke publicly about that day. The story of the photograph took an unexpected turn when we located Harriet Simmons, now 97, whose mother had worked as Eleanor's shop assistant in the 1920s. Harriet recalled childhood visits to Mrs. Hargrove's establishment. She was not a sad woman, as you might expect, Harriet told us, her eyes bright with the memory. She laughed often, especially with the ladies who came to try on hats. But there was something watchful about her, too. My mother said Mrs. Hargrove kept that little silver gun in her shop drawer until the day she sold the business. Eleanor's legacy extended beyond the photograph. Records from women's suffrage meetings in 1917 show her name among attendees. Later, she quietly provided financial assistance to a local women's aid society, one of the first organizations in Massachusetts offering shelter to women fleeing domestic violence. The photograph remains compelling not just for what it shows, but for what it represents. A woman's calculated risk, taken at her own wedding, to ensure her survival in a world where few other protections existed for her. The photograph found its way to the collection of Dr. Miriam Walsh, a forensic anthropologist specializing in historical case review, who noticed something previous observers had missed. Beneath the edges of Eleanor's high lace collar was a faint but distinct bruising pattern, carefully concealed with powder but visible under specialized photographic analysis. The marks are consistent with manual strangulation, Dr. Walsh explained, based on the coloration and healing pattern visible even through the photographic medium. I would estimate these injuries occurred approximately 5 to 7 days before the wedding. This discovery led us to the private medical records of Dr. James Pendleton, the Hargrove family physician. His notes, written in nearly illegible script, documented a visit from Eleanor on June 2, 1912, just 5 days before her wedding. The diagnosis was listed as female hysteria with accompanying throat inflammation, a common medical deflection of the era used to disguise evidence of domestic violence. More illuminating was a small leather-bound ledger kept by Reverend William Stokes, who performed the wedding ceremony. His personal notations, never intended for public view, revealed profound concerns. Miss Winters appeared most reluctant during rehearsal, he wrote. When I inquired if she entered this union of her own free will, she glanced at Mr. Hargrove Sr. before answering in the affirmative. I observe that she carries herself as one injured, though she denies any ailment when asked. I have expressed my concerns to her father, who assures me all is well. The elder Mr. Hargrove's influence extended beyond banking. Town council minutes from 1911 show his substantial donation for the construction of the new courthouse and his appointment of the local magistrate, the very man who would later oversee the inquest into his son's death. Perhaps most chilling was our discovery in the attic of the former Hargrove mansion, now converted into a small museum of local history. Workers renovating the space in 2018 found a hidden compartment beneath a floorboard in what had been Thomas's study. Inside lay a collection of items: a torn piece of women's clothing, locks of hair tied with different colored ribbons, and a journal filled with disturbing entries detailing corrections administered to various women. The final entry, dated June 16, 1916, the day before Thomas's death, contained a single line: Eleanor requires a significant reminder of her place. Margaret Hargrove's academic records show she attended Radcliffe College beginning in 1930, becoming one of the first women in Massachusetts to earn a law degree. Her specialization, family law, with particular emphasis on cases involving domestic violence. In 1942, she successfully argued before the state Supreme Court for expanded legal protections for married women, citing case histories that, while anonymized, bore striking similarities to her mother's experience. The wedding photograph, with its hidden weapon and concealed bruises, wasn't just documentation of a moment frozen in time. It was Eleanor's silent testimony, evidence preserved for a future she hoped would better understand what she couldn't openly express in 1912. The exhibition of Eleanor's photograph quickly drew attention beyond academic circles, appearing in several national publications and sparking intense debate about historical perspectives on women's self-defense. This newfound publicity led to an unexpected development: a letter from Curtis Blackwell, an 86-year-old man living in a retirement community in Florida. "I believe I have something that belongs with your collection," Curtis wrote. "My grandmother was the housekeeper for the Hargrove family during the last year of Thomas Hargrove's life." What Curtis provided was extraordinary: a small leather-bound notebook that had belonged to Alma Blackwell, who had worked in the Hargrove household from early 1915 until shortly after Thomas's death. The elderly man had discovered it among his late mother's possessions, its significance unknown to him until he saw Eleanor's photograph in a magazine. Alma's careful handwriting documented the household's daily operations, but between inventory lists and meal plans were coded observations about the family's private life. She had developed her own shorthand system, marking days with small symbols: a circle for when the master's mood was dark, a small cross for when Madam retreated to her room with headaches. The entries grew increasingly concerned in the weeks before Thomas's death. Found Madam's handkerchief with blood again. She claims a nosebleed, but her nose shows no signs of such. The little miss watches everything with those large eyes. Children see more than we credit them for. Most revealing was her entry from June 17, 1916, the day of Thomas Hargrove's death. The master returned from his club in the most fearful temper I have yet witnessed. He commanded Madam to his study after dinner. Little Miss was abed. I heard shouting, then a crash of something breaking, then the sound that will haunt my dreams. Not loud, just a sharp report like a firecracker. Silence followed. I did not investigate. May God forgive me. I took Little Miss from her bed and sat with her in the kitchen, telling stories until the authorities arrived. When the senior Mr. Hargrove questioned me later, I said I had heard nothing unusual. The look in Madam's eyes as she thanked me afterward told me I had chosen rightly. Alma Blackwell left the Hargrove household 2 weeks later, taking a position with a family in neighboring Connecticut. Her final notation regarding the incident: "Some secrets are walls that protect, not barriers to truth." The discovery prompted us to re-examine the inquest documents with fresh eyes. The official report noted that Thomas's body was found behind his desk, the fatal wound to his chest. The family derringer, officially registered as Thomas's property, though matching the description of Aunt Martha's gift, was found 4 feet away on the floor. County Sheriff's notes, previously overlooked, mentioned that Eleanor had been questioned with her father-in-law present. Her hands tested for gunpowder residue. The results were negative. What the sheriff failed to note, but what Alma's diary now revealed, was that Eleanor had been wearing gloves when the authorities arrived. Her white evening gloves, oddly formal for the hour, but spotless. The wedding photograph, with its deliberately visible weapon, now seemed less a desperate threat and more a calculated warning, one that Thomas Hargrove had ultimately failed to heed. In 2021, the Shadow Frames exhibition traveled to the Smithsonian, where Eleanor's photograph was viewed by Judith Pearson, a retired detective specializing in cold cases. Her insights added yet another dimension to our understanding of Eleanor's story. What strikes me about this case is the deliberate nature of Eleanor's actions. Pearson noted during her consultation, "The positioning of the derringer isn't accidental or careless. It's precisely calibrated to be visible in the photograph without being immediately obvious. This suggests not just fear, but strategic thinking." Pearson's analysis led us to examine other photographs from the Hargrove Winters wedding. In the church group portrait, Eleanor stands slightly apart from Thomas, her body angled away. A subtle but distinct separation that body language experts identified as defensive posturing. More telling was a candid image taken during the reception. Eleanor speaking with an elderly woman, their heads close together, while Thomas watches from across the room with visible displeasure. This elderly woman was identified as Constance Winthrop, Eleanor's maternal grandmother, who had been widowed 3 times. Parish records from 1862 revealed that her first husband, Eleanor's grandfather, had died under circumstances remarkably similar to Thomas Hargrove's, a firearm accident in his study. Family correspondence discovered in the Winters family Bible suggests Constance may have been the original owner of the silver derringer, passing it first to her daughter Martha, who then gave it to Eleanor. 3 generations of women linked by a single weapon of last resort. Dr. Evelyn Monroe, historian of women's resistance movements, placed Eleanor's actions within a broader historical context. Throughout history, women created hidden networks of knowledge and protection. While men controlled formal power structures, women developed covert systems to keep each other safe. The passing of this weapon through maternal lines represents an unwritten survival strategy, predating formal domestic violence interventions by decades. The derringer itself was finally located in 2022 in a safe deposit box maintained continuously since 1950 by Margaret Hargrove and later her daughter. Alongside it lay a handwritten account of what truly transpired the night of Thomas's death, sealed with instructions that it remain unopened until 75 years after Eleanor's passing. The account, written in Eleanor's steady hand, confirmed what Alma's diary had suggested. Thomas had indeed returned home in a violent rage that evening, threatening to send 4-year-old Margaret away to boarding school to break her mother's obstinance. When he began to remove his belt, Eleanor produced the derringer from its hiding place in her sewing basket. She had not intended to fire, only to deter his advances as she had successfully done several times before. But in his fury, Thomas lunged toward her, and in the ensuing struggle, the weapon discharged. Eleanor's final paragraph reveals her complex legacy. "I do not call myself innocent, but neither do I count myself guilty. What I did preserved 2 lives that night, Margaret's and my own. The law would have protected neither of us had I not acted. I leave this truth to a future I hope will judge not just my actions, but the circumstances that necessitated them." The wedding photograph, with its concealed weapon and bruised bride, stands as a silent witness to choices made in an era when women's options were severely limited. Not just a historical curiosity, but a somber reminder of justice sought outside a system designed to exclude it. The legacy of Eleanor's wedding photograph continued to unfold in unexpected ways when we were contacted by Dr. Julia Reynolds, curator of a small museum dedicated to women's history in Salem, Massachusetts. She had recognized the silver derringer from records in her archives. "We have a collection of journals from a gunsmith's daughter who worked in her father's shop in Philadelphia during the 1880s, Dr. Reynolds explained. She documented every lady's companion her father crafted, including detailed sketches and the names of purchasers. The weapon in your photograph has distinct engraving patterns that match one commissioned by a Constance Winthrop in 1882. The journal entries revealed that Constance had personally visited the shop, requesting modifications to the standard design, specifically an engraved rose on the grip and a slightly altered trigger mechanism that would require more deliberate pressure, preventing accidental discharge. "I require reliability above all," the gunsmith's daughter quoted Constance as saying. "This is not an ornament, but a guardian." This confirmation of the weapon's provenance led us to newspaper archives from 1862, where we found a brief mention of the death of Constance's first husband, Jonathan Winthrop. The article described him as a man of passionate temperament who met his end through misadventure with his own firearm. Interviews with survivors of the period noted that Jonathan had been known locally for his strict management of his household. Most revealing was a parish record discovered in the archives of St. Michael's Church, where Eleanor and Thomas were later married. The document, a private letter from the minister to his bishop, expressed concerns about Constance Winthrop following her first husband's death. "The widow shows no appropriate grief," he wrote. "When I suggested prayer might ease her burden of sorrow, she replied that her burden had already been lifted. I fear for her immortal soul, as there is something in her demeanor that suggests satisfaction rather than bereavement." Through genealogical research, we traced the descendants of Margaret Hargrove, Eleanor's daughter. Her granddaughter, Professor Catherine Larson, teaches criminal justice at Northeastern University, specializing in domestic violence law. When shown the wedding photograph, she was visibly moved. Family stories mentioned my great-grandmother's difficult first marriage, but details were always vague, Professor Larson explained. "What's extraordinary is how this knowledge was transmitted between generations of women without explicit discussion. My mother always emphasized the importance of financial independence and having contingency plans. She kept a small handgun in her bedside drawer after my father died, though I never saw her use it. The language changes, but the message persists." Perhaps the most chilling discovery came when architectural historians examined the former Hargrove mansion during renovation. Behind a section of wall in what had been Eleanor's dressing room, workers found a small recess containing a child's drawing. The faded paper showed three figures: a tall man lying down, a woman standing with what appeared to be a star in her hand, and a small girl behind her. Written in a child's uneven script were the words, "Mommy fixed it." The drawing was dated June 18th, 1916, the day after Thomas Hargrove's death. Margaret, only 4 years old, had created her own record of events, hidden where only Eleanor would likely discover it. This silent communication between mother and daughter, one concealing evidence that might endanger them both, the other acknowledging a truth too dangerous to speak aloud, reveals how early children learn to navigate the complex terrain of family secrets, particularly when those secrets ensure survival. The photograph of Eleanor and her concealed weapon eventually reached Marianne Kendrick, an archivist specializing in criminal justice history. Her contribution to our understanding came not through Eleanor's story directly, but through a parallel case she had documented from the same era. In 1915, just 1 year before Thomas Hargrove's death, a woman named Rebecca Holloway stood trial for the murder of her husband in Pittsfield, less than 30 miles from the Hargrove residence, Marianne explained. The circumstances were remarkably similar: a late-night shooting in the husband's study, claims of accident, but with one crucial difference. Rebecca had no witnesses to support her version of events. Unlike Eleanor, Rebecca Holloway was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Newspaper coverage of the trial revealed that Thomas Hargrove Sr. had been among the most vocal community members demanding her punishment, writing editorials about maintaining the sanctity of marriage and the dangerous precedent of excusing a wife who raises her hand against her husband. Most significant was what Marianne discovered in Rebecca Holloway's personal effects, preserved in prison archives. A carefully folded newspaper clipping about Thomas Hargrove's death, with a handwritten note in the margin, "She found a way. God bless her." The connection between these two women might have remained speculation had we not located a visitor log from the Massachusetts Women's Correctional Facility showing that Margaret Hargrove, by then a practicing attorney, visited Rebecca Holloway 3 times between 1939 and 1941. The nature of their conversations was not recorded, but following the final visit, Rebecca was granted early release due to a successful appeal filed by an unnamed legal advocate. The photograph that began our investigation exists in a complex web of silent communications across generations and between women who never directly acknowledged their shared experiences publicly. It represents not just one woman's desperate act of self-protection, but an underground network of knowledge, passed from grandmother to aunt to mother to daughter. This network extended beyond blood relations. We found evidence that Eleanor had quietly employed 2 other women with histories of domestic abuse at her millinery shop, providing them economic independence when few options existed. One of these women later established her own business in a neighboring town, continuing the pattern of creating safe employment for vulnerable women. The silver derringer that appeared so deliberately in Eleanor's wedding portrait wasn't merely a weapon. It was a symbol of a parallel system of justice that operated when formal structures failed women completely. Each woman who possessed it understood its dual purpose, as both protection and as a grim acknowledgement of reality. When Eleanor Winters walked down the aisle in 1912, the small pistol nestled beneath her bouquet represented her clear-eyed assessment of what her marriage might become. The photograph preserves not just her fear, but her determination to survive by whatever means necessary in a world where the law offered her little protection and even less recourse. As our investigation drew to its conclusion, we felt compelled to visit the cemetery where Eleanor was laid to rest in 1952. Her grave stood beneath a modest maple tree, the headstone weathered but still legible. What caught our attention wasn't the grave itself, but what surrounded it, a perfect circle of white roses, freshly planted and thriving despite the cemetery's otherwise minimal maintenance. The groundskeeper, noticing our interest, approached slowly. "Those flowers have been here as long as I've worked this place, going on 30 years now," he explained. "Every spring they return, and nobody plants them. Tried to remove them once, back when the new management wanted everything standardized. Within a week they grew back, stronger than before." This curious detail led us to local folklore specialist Dr. Helena Voss, who had documented unusual phenomena associated with graves of women from Eleanor's era. "In New England tradition, persistent flowers growing unbidden around a grave often signify unfinished business," she explained. "Local lore holds that souls who sought justice in life but found it only partially continue to make their presence known." Through Dr. Voss, we connected with Marjorie Kellerman, a 93-year-old former nurse who had attended Eleanor in her final days. Her testimony added an unsettling dimension to our understanding. "Eleanor knew she was dying," Marjorie recalled, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. "The night before she passed, she became agitated, insisting she needed to write something down. I brought her paper and pen, then left to give her privacy. When I returned, she was sleeping peacefully, the paper folded on her nightstand. By morning, she was gone. The note disappeared before any family members arrived." Marjorie, bound by what she considered a sacred trust between nurse and patient, had kept its contents secret for 70 years. She wrote that Thomas wasn't the only one. Marjorie finally revealed there were others, men who had hurt women and escaped justice through money or connection. 7 names. Eleanor wrote that she had helped alongside them all, though she never specified how. This revelation cast new light on Eleanor's life after Thomas's death. County records showed that 7 prominent men from the region died under various circumstances between 1917 and 1948, all ruled accidents or natural causes, yet all bearing subtle similarities to Thomas Hargrove's demise. Each man had whispered allegations of domestic violence in his past. Each had interacted with Eleanor through her millinery business or social circles. Most disturbing was what we found in Eleanor's business ledgers. Special notations beside the names of certain female clients, a simple flower symbol inked discreetly in the margin. These same women had connections to the 7 men who died mysteriously. The silver derringer, examined by modern forensic techniques, revealed something overlooked in previous analyses: microscopic notches carved inside the barrel, 7 in total, in addition to the more obvious wear that would have resulted from the shot that killed Thomas. We cannot prove that Eleanor Winters evolved from victim to vigilante. from a desperate bride hiding a weapon in her wedding bouquet to something more deliberate and systematic. The evidence remains circumstantial, separated by decades and obscured by the passage of time. Yet the white roses bloom each spring around her grave, and the women of Berkshire County still sometimes whisper when passing her final resting place. She watches over her daughters still. In the decades since our initial investigation, Eleanor's photograph has continued to reveal its secrets, particularly in the subtle ways it influences those who encounter it. Museum curators have reported unusual phenomena when displaying the image. Visitors often become emotional without explanation. Women in particular linger before it, some reaching instinctively to touch their own necks, as if feeling phantom bruises mirroring Eleanor's concealed injuries. During a recent digital preservation project, technicians discovered something extraordinary when examining the original glass plate negative. Under specialized lighting, previously invisible writing appeared along the photograph's lower edge, microscopic text scratched into the emulsion by what must have been a pin or needle. "We see you, sister." Handwriting analysis suggests this message wasn't added by Eleanor, but by the photographer, Beatrice Crane, one of the few female professional photographers working in Massachusetts during the early 1900s. Further research into Crane's background revealed she had photographed at least 3 other brides from the period who concealed objects beneath their bouquets: a folded banknote in one case, a small key in another, and what appears to be a train ticket in the third. The implications are profound. The wedding photograph wasn't merely Eleanor's solitary act of resistance, but evidence of a wider network of women who recognized the signals of abuse and created systems to acknowledge and assist each other, often communicating through coded gestures and symbols. Professor Emily Sutherland, historian of women's covert resistance movements, explains, "These weren't organized feminist collectives with manifestos. These were informal survival networks, often crossing class boundaries, that operated beneath the notice of patriarchal structures. What looks to modernize like submission was frequently subtle subversion." The photograph's journey has even triggered legal reconsiderations. A Massachusetts appellate judge cited Eleanor's case in a 2023 opinion expanding self-defense protections, noting that historical cases demonstrate that women's resistance to intimate partner violence has been systematically minimized or criminalized throughout our jurisprudence. Perhaps most poignant was the discovery made by conservation specialists when removing Eleanor's photograph from its original frame during restoration. Pressed between the backing board and the photograph was a small, carefully preserved 4-leaf clover. Botanical analysis dated it to approximately 1912, suggesting it had been placed there at or near the time of framing. In Victorian and Edwardian flower language, 4-leaf clovers represented not just luck, but protection, a silent talisman hidden where only those who disassembled the frame would find it. Whether placed by Eleanor herself, the photographer, or another ally remains unknown. The story of Eleanor's wedding photograph continues to unfold across time, speaking to each generation in different ways, but always carrying the same essential truth, that women have never been merely passive victims of history, but active agents navigating impossible choices with the tools available to them, preserving evidence of their reality for those who might someday understand. As interest in Eleanor's story spread, it unexpectedly reached Dr. Nathan Carroll, a retired ballistics expert formerly with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. After viewing our exhibition, he requested permission to examine the silver derringer using modern forensic techniques not available during our initial analysis. What caught my attention were those 7 notches inside the barrel. Dr. Carroll explained during his consultation, "That's not damage from regular use or age. Those are deliberately placed marks, created with a jeweler's precision tool." His examination revealed something we had overlooked. The notches formed a specific pattern that matched an ancient protection symbol found in early New England folk magic traditions. According to archival records from the American Folklore Society, this particular marking was believed to bind a weapon to justice among certain rural communities in the 18th and 19th centuries. "The craftsmanship is remarkable," Dr. Carroll noted. "These weren't carved in haste or desperation, but with deliberate care, likely over a period of years. Each mark is slightly different in depth and angle, suggesting they were added individually, possibly at different times." This discovery prompted us to re-examine Eleanor's personal calendar, preserved among Margaret's effects. Small flower symbols appeared at seemingly random intervals throughout the years following Thomas's death, dates that, when cross-referenced with local obituaries, aligned precisely with the deaths of those 7 men mentioned in Eleanor's final note. More revealing was what we found when we analyzed the dried white rose preserved in the family Bible. Modern botanical DNA testing confirmed it was indeed from Eleanor's wedding bouquet, but microscopic examination revealed something extraordinary: nearly invisible traces of silver embedded in the preserved petals, suggesting the flower had been in prolonged contact with the derringer, not just on the wedding day, but possibly for years afterward. This physical connection between the wedding bouquet and the weapon suggested a ritual significance, the flowers not merely concealing the gun, but somehow blessing or consecrating it. Eleanor had maintained this association deliberately, keeping the dried rose not as a sentimental wedding memento, but as part of something more purposeful. Dr. Miriam Blackwell, an anthropologist specializing in women's ritual practices, offered insight. Throughout history, women denied formal power have created their own systems of meaning and justice. The combination of wedding flowers, symbols of feminine purity, with a weapon of self-defense represents a powerful reclamation of agency. By preserving the rose in the family Bible, Eleanor was essentially sanctifying her actions through both Christian and older folk traditions. The final piece of this complex puzzle came from an unexpected source: a dream diary kept by Margaret Hargrove from ages 12 through 16. Within its pages, she recorded recurring nightmares of the silver lady who visits bad men. These dreams, initially concerning to her teachers who noted them in school reports, gradually transformed in tone from frightening to comforting. In her final entry at 16, Margaret wrote, "I understand now what Mother does when she disappears on certain nights. The Silver Lady is not a ghost, but a reminder that wickedness cannot always hide behind respectability. Some debts must be paid in this world, not the next." The wedding photograph, with its concealed weapon, was not merely the beginning of Eleanor's story, but the foundation of a deliberately constructed personal mythology, one that transformed a desperate bride into something her era had no name for, but our own might recognize as an avenging angel. The photograph's journey reached a crucial turning point when we received correspondence from Violet Hanson, great-granddaughter of Beatrice Crane, the photographer who had captured Eleanor's wedding portrait. Now in her 80s, Violet had discovered a hidden compartment in her grandmother's antique camera case. "I found something I believe connects to your research," Violet wrote. A small leather-bound notebook with coded entries and photographs of brides spanning from 1910 to 1922. The notebook proved invaluable. Beatrice Crane had maintained a secret registry of women she identified as being in dangerous marriages. Each entry included cryptic symbols next to the women's names, along with small annotations about provisions made or arrangements secured. What emerged was evidence of an astonishing underground network operating throughout New England. Beatrice used her position as a society photographer to identify women showing signs of abuse. Through careful conversation during photo sessions, she would determine if intervention was needed, then connect these women with others who could offer assistance: safe houses, employment opportunities, transportation to distant locations, or in some cases, more direct forms of protection. Eleanor appeared in this registry with a unique notation: self-sufficient, refuses departure, accepts silver insurance only. The entry was dated 3 days before her wedding. "My grandmother never spoke openly about this work," Violet explained during our interview, "but she photographed hundreds of society weddings, and in her personal albums, she kept a separate collection she called her Survivors Gallery, women who had escaped dangerous situations." Most remarkable was a coded map found within the notebook's lining, revealing a network of safe houses stretching from Massachusetts to Maine. These refugees were maintained by a loose association of women, many widowed or independently wealthy, who provided temporary sanctuary for those fleeing abusive situations. County property records confirmed that Eleanor purchased a small cottage in 1921 under her business name rather than her personal one. This property, situated near the Vermont border, appeared on Beatrice's map, marked with a symbol indicating a transition point. Oral histories collected from elderly residents in the area included references to women who would arrive at the train station, often at night, and be quietly escorted to Mrs. Hargrove's country property. They would stay for periods ranging from days to months before moving on, usually northward toward Canada. When we visited the site of this cottage, now long abandoned, archaeological investigation revealed something extraordinary beneath the root cellar: a small metal box containing identity documents for 17 different women. all with signs of alteration. These crude but effective early attempts at creating new identities included marriage certificates with changed names, baptismal records with altered dates, and employment references for positions that likely never existed. The wedding photograph that began our journey was not merely documentation of a woman's private resistance, but evidence of her induction into a much larger sisterhood, women who had created parallel systems of justice and protection when formal institutions failed them. Eleanor's transition from threatened bride to apparent vigilante to operator of a safe house represents not an aberration, but an evolution within this covert network. The silver derringer visible beneath her wedding flowers was more than a weapon. It was her introduction to an underground railroad of sorts, one that transported women not from slavery to freedom, but from captivity within marriage to the possibility of new lives. The wedding photograph of Eleanor found an unexpected champion in Dr. Evelyn Whitaker, a forensic psychologist specializing in generational trauma. Her analysis offered a framework for understanding the lasting impact of Eleanor's actions beyond the immediate circumstances. What's remarkable about this case isn't just the network of women who supported each other, Dr. Whitaker explained during her keynote address at the American Psychological Association conference. It's the deliberate creation of what I call trauma interruption, Eleanor's conscious decision to break a cycle that might otherwise have continued through generations. Research into Thomas Hargrove's family history revealed a pattern of violence stretching back at least 4 generations. Court records from 1837 documented his great-grandfather's trial for the excessive correction of his wife, resulting in her hospitalization. The case was dismissed when she refused to testify. Similar incidents appeared throughout the family line, each one minimized, explained away, or simply ignored by authorities. By concealing the derringer in her wedding photograph, Dr. Whitaker continued, Eleanor wasn't just protecting herself, she was creating a visual testimony that would outlive her, evidence that she entered her marriage clear-eyed about the danger, not as a naive victim. This interpretation gained credibility when we examined Margaret Hargrove's personal effects more thoroughly. Among them was a silver locket containing a miniature reproduction of her parents' wedding photograph, carefully cropped to highlight Eleanor's hands with the partially visible derringer. Margaret had worn this locket throughout her legal career, including during her groundbreaking court appearances advocating for expanded protections for married women. The psychological impact of Eleanor's actions extended even to women who never knew her personally. When the photograph was included in a 2018 exhibition on women's resistance, museum staff documented visitors' responses. Many women left handwritten notes describing their own experiences with relationship violence and the inspiration they drew from Eleanor's story. One particularly moving response came from a 92-year-old visitor who wrote, "In 1946, I left my husband after he broke my arm. Everyone told me to go back to him. Instead, I went to a millinery shop owned by a woman who had once worked for Mrs. Hargrove. She gave me a job in a room above the shop. She never mentioned Eleanor by name, but she kept a white rose in a silver vase on her counter. Now I understand what that meant." Dr. Whitaker's analysis highlighted how objects can become vessels for intergenerational knowledge, carrying warnings and wisdom that cannot be spoken aloud. The derringer wasn't just a weapon, she noted. It was a talisman that connected Eleanor to her female ancestors and descendants, a physical manifestation of their collective resistance. This perspective was reinforced when techniques from material culture studies were applied to Eleanor's other surviving possessions. Her sewing scissors, now preserved in the Smithsonian collection, show distinctive wear patterns, suggesting they were frequently held in a reverse grip, positioned for defensive use rather than needlework. The intricate embroidery on her handkerchiefs, previously admired merely for aesthetic qualities, revealed subtly worked protection symbols hidden within conventional floral designs. Eleanor lived in a world that denied her formal power, Dr. Whitaker concluded, yet she constructed an alternative framework of personal and communal safety, using the very objects associated with feminine submission. Her wedding bouquet concealed a weapon. Her embroidery contained warnings. Her millinery shop became a sanctuary. She transformed the symbols of her confinement into tools for liberation, not just for herself, but for generations of women who would follow. The culmination of our investigation into Eleanor's photograph occurred not in dusty archives or forensic laboratories, but in the living memory of a community that had silently preserved her legacy for over a century. During a public lecture about our findings, an elderly woman approached the podium, trembling slightly as she leaned on her walker. "My name is Ruth Caldwell," she announced, her voice surprisingly strong despite her 96 years. "My grandmother worked alongside Eleanor in that millinery shop during the 1930s. There's something about the white roses you should know." In the hushed auditorium, Ruth revealed what had never been documented in any official record. The white roses that mysteriously bloomed around Eleanor's grave weren't merely symbolic. They had been cultivated from cuttings taken from her wedding bouquet. Eleanor had rooted these cuttings herself, growing them in window boxes behind her shop. Each time a woman came seeking sanctuary, she would present her with a single white bloom. It was a recognition signal, Ruth explained. Women who received a rose knew they'd been marked for protection. The network would mobilize, creating documentation, arranging transportation, sometimes providing more permanent solutions when necessary. The roses served another purpose. Eleanor had developed a specific method of pressing and preserving the flowers, incorporating microscopic amounts of silver filings scraped from the derringer. These preserved blooms were then sewn into the hems of traveling clothes or hidden in prayer books, subtle totems carried by women as they moved through the underground network. "My grandmother told me something Eleanor would say," Ruth continued, her eyes distant with memory. "The law considers us property, so we must become ghosts, invisible to those who would claim ownership of us." This revelation illuminated our understanding of Eleanor's most complex legacy, what locals had called the haunting of Hargrove Lane. For decades after her death, women in crisis reported encounters with a lady in white who would appear at crossroads or train stations, silently leading them toward safety. What seemed like supernatural folklore was actually a coordinated effort by Eleanor's successors, using her carefully constructed mythology as operational cover. Most astonishing was Ruth's final disclosure. From her purse, she withdrew a small velvet pouch containing what appeared to be rose petals, brittle with age. "These have been passed down through 4 generations of my family," she said. "We were instructed to keep them until they were truly needed. I believe that time has come." Scientific analysis later confirmed these petals contained the same molecular signature as those preserved in Eleanor's Bible, direct physical descendants of her wedding bouquet from 1912. More remarkably, the silver particles embedded within them matched the unique metallurgical profile of the derringer's barrel. In the centuries since Eleanor stood for her wedding portrait, partially revealing the weapon that would both end and begin her true life, her influence had spread like the roots of her roses, unseen but powerful, breaking through concrete barriers, finding paths around obstacles, creating networks of sustenance and protection where none had officially existed. Her photograph wasn't merely historical evidence of one woman's desperate measures, but the genesis point of a living tradition that continued to adapt and evolve, invisible to those who weren't looking for it, but unmistakable to those who needed its sanctuary. The enduring power of Eleanor's photograph lives on through modern technology in ways she could never have imagined. In 2024, digital restoration specialist Dr. Amara Chen used advanced spectral imaging to examine the original glass plate negative, revealing handprints invisible to the naked eye, fingerprints preserved in the emulsion along the photograph's edges. "These aren't the photographer's prints," Dr. Chen explained during her presentation at MIT's Media Archaeology Lab. "Based on the position and pressure patterns, these are from someone who held the negative while it was still wet, deliberately leaving their mark." Cross-referencing the prints through newly digitized historical records yielded a stunning connection. They matched those of Catherine Winthrop, Eleanor's cousin who had vanished in 1908 after a brief, reportedly violent marriage. Previously believed dead, Catherine's fingerprints appeared on employment documents from a women's college in Montreal dated 1914, under an entirely different name. Eleanor's cousin didn't die, Dr. Chen concluded. She escaped, likely through the same network Eleanor would later help expand. More significantly, she returned secretly, at great personal risk, to assist with creating this photographic evidence. The discovery prompted examination of other wedding photographs from Studio Crane. 5 additional portraits from the same period showed similar fingerprint patterns, different hands, but identical placement, suggesting a ritual significance. Each of these brides had something concealed in their portrait, small objects of protection or escape that ordinary viewers would overlook. Most revealing was what anthropologist Teresa Blackburn uncovered in her interviews with descendants of these women. Each family retained stories of a matriarch who had to become someone else to survive. These narratives, previously dismissed as family mythology, now formed a coherent pattern of organized resistance. What Eleanor and these other women created wasn't just a rescue network, Blackburn explained. It was an alternative identity system operating beneath official records. When necessary, women could shed their legal names, properties of their husbands under law, and transform themselves completely. The symbolic weight of the photograph took on new dimensions when contemporary survivors of domestic violence encountered it. Therapist Marina Santos incorporated Eleanor's image into trauma recovery workshops, noting how participants responded to its concealed messages. There's something deeply validating about seeing this historical evidence of women's resistance, Santos observed. It counters the narrative that domestic violence is a modern problem, or that previous generations simply accepted abuse as inevitable. The most unexpected consequence emerged in law enforcement circles, where Eleanor's case became required study at the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. Senior instructor Camilla Johnson developed a curriculum around historical cases of what she terms necessary violence, situations where legal systems comprehensively failed to protect vulnerable individuals. Eleanor Winters Hargrove occupies a unique position in our understanding of justice, Johnson noted in her lecture series. She navigated an impossible moral terrain, transforming from victim to protector to, potentially, what modern law would classify as a vigilante. Yet her actions occurred in a context where every legitimate avenue for protection was closed to her. The hidden weapon in her wedding photograph wasn't just a desperate measure, it was the beginning of a methodical response to systematic failure. The silver derringer, the pressed roses, the coded ledgers, the safe houses, all formed a constellation of resistance that continues to resonate across generations, challenging us to recognize what remains hidden in plain sight before us today. The photograph of Eleanor Winters Hargrove now resides in the Smithsonian's permanent collection, protected by UV-resistant glass and climate controls that ensure its preservation for centuries to come. Yet despite these scientific precautions, conservators have documented an unexplainable phenomenon. The image appears to change subtly depending on who views it. When men approach the photograph, particularly those who museum staff later identify as having histories of controlling behavior, the derringer beneath Eleanor's bouquet becomes nearly invisible, blending into the flowers until it's merely a silver blur easily dismissed as a decoration or photographic flaw. When women in distress view the image, however, the weapon emerges with startling clarity, along with the previously hidden bruising at Eleanor's throat. Several visitors have reported that the photograph seemed to reveal itself to them during periods of personal crisis, with the gun appearing more prominent than what museum documentation actually shows. Dr. Rachel Montgomery, parapsychologist and skeptic, spent 9 months studying this phenomenon, eventually concluding, "While I cannot verify supernatural properties in the photograph itself, I can confirm a statistical anomaly in perception patterns among viewers that defies random distribution. Something about this image triggers recognition in those who need its message most." The white roses continue their inexplicable blooming around Eleanor's grave, but botanical geneticists have made a discovery that challenges scientific understanding. DNA analysis of these flowers reveals they are genetically identical, not just to each other, but to preserved petals from Eleanor's wedding bouquet, a botanical impossibility across more than a century of natural growth cycles. "These roses shouldn't exist," explained Dr. Sophia Williams, botanical geneticist. "They show no evidence of genetic drift or mutation that would naturally occur over generations. It's as if time has stopped for these particular specimens." Most remarkably, cuttings from these roses have appeared at domestic violence shelters across New England, usually arriving anonymously overnight. Staff report finding single white blooms on doorsteps, already rooted in small containers, with no surveillance footage ever capturing their delivery. Women residing in these shelters often report dreams of a figure in Edwardian dress who guides them to hidden resources, legal documents they had forgotten they possessed, family heirlooms containing hidden valuables, or evidence useful in obtaining restraining orders. Upon waking, many discover a white rose petal on their pillow, though the buildings remain securely locked throughout the night. The silver derringer itself, now handled only with archival gloves by museum specialists, continues to defy explanation. Metal fatigue analysis suggests it should have degraded significantly over the past century, yet it remains in near-perfect condition. More puzzling still, microscopic examination reveals that the 7 notches inside the barrel appear to be changing configuration gradually, as though slowly forming new patterns. "We photograph the interior weekly for documentation," noted senior conservator Michael Chen, "and there are discrepancies we cannot explain through normal material processes or handling error. The metal appears to be rearranging itself." Eleanor's legacy exists in this liminal space between documented history and living myth. A photograph that serves as both historical evidence and active talisman, a weapon that functions as both artifact and oracle, and roses that bloom impossibly at the intersection of memory and magic, reminding us that some forms of justice operate beyond our conventional understanding. The quiet revelation came during the conservation of Eleanor's wedding dress, preserved all these years in acid-free tissue within the Hargrove family cedar chest. Textile conservator Mai Nguyen discovered a series of nearly invisible alterations to the gown's interior structure. Hidden pockets sewn with such precision they disappeared completely when the dress hung naturally on the body. These modifications required exceptional skill, Mai explained, carefully turning the delicate fabric. They're positioned to allow access to specific areas while wearing the dress, yet completely invisible to observers. The pockets corresponded exactly to where Eleanor would have needed to reach for the derringer during the ceremony had she felt threatened. More surprising was the discovery of minuscule symbols embroidered in white thread on white fabric along these hidden seams, protection sigils from at least 4 different cultural traditions, some dating back centuries. This suggests collaboration, Mai noted. No single seamstress would have knowledge of ancient Celtic knotwork, Puritan hex signs, Italian folk magic, and what appears to be indigenous Algonquian protective symbols. This wedding dress was created by a collective of women with diverse knowledge traditions, all focused on one purpose, ensuring Eleanor's safety. Invoice records from the dress's creation confirmed Mai's theory. While officially commissioned from Hargrove's preferred Boston tailor, the gown had been sent to 4 different women for finishing details before the wedding. Each name matched women in Beatrice Crane's network documented in her leather notebook. Perhaps most revealing was what Mai found concealed within the dress's high collar, designed specifically to hide Eleanor's bruises. Sewn into this collar was a thin silver chainmail lining, virtually weightless, but strong enough to prevent strangulation. Metallurgical analysis confirmed this silver came from the same source as the derringer, suggesting the weapon and the protective garment were conceived as complementary elements. Eleanor walked down the aisle not just with a concealed weapon, Mai observed, but wearing what amounts to ceremonial armor. This wasn't merely a desperate act of self-protection, it was a ritual inversion of the wedding ceremony itself. This discovery fundamentally shifted our understanding of the wedding photograph. Eleanor wasn't simply a victim with a gun, she was a woman who had methodically prepared for every contingency with the support of a sophisticated network. The photograph documented not just her private rebellion, but a communal act of resistance disguised as conformity. Further examination of the dress revealed one final secret, a message embroidered in microscopic stitches along the hem, visible only under magnification. "Remember your grandmother's hands, guide yours." The thread used contained traces of silver, creating an unbroken circuit of protection from the hidden collar to the message at her feet, surrounding Eleanor entirely within a circle of safekeeping. Across time, through photograph and artifact, these women spoke a language of resistance through their needlework and silver, through flowers and concealed messages, creating systems of protection when laws and men failed them. Their whispered knowledge passed through generations, transforming victimhood into agency through objects that appeared ornamental but served as lifelines, their true purpose visible only to those who knew where to look. The wedding photograph's story found its final chapter when a small package arrived at our research office, postmarked from a small town in Quebec. Inside was a weathered journal, its leather cover worn smooth by decades of handling. The accompanying note, written in a trembling elderly hand, read simply, "My grandmother said to send this when the white roses bloomed twice in winter. Last month they did." The journal belonged to Josephine Tremblay, born Josephine Winters, Eleanor's younger sister, whose existence had somehow eluded our previous research. While Eleanor had remained in Massachusetts after Thomas's death, Josephine had moved north in 1917, establishing herself as a dressmaker in a remote Canadian village. Her journal entries revealed the missing connections we had sought. Josephine had been present at Eleanor's wedding, serving as an unmarried bridesmaid. It was she who had made the final alterations to Eleanor's dress the night before the ceremony, adding the protective silver threading to the collar at their grandmother Constance's instruction. "Eleanor does not tremble as I sew," Josephine wrote. "She speaks of seeing clearly for the first time. Grandmother has given her more than the silver piece. She has given her certainty. I pray it is enough." Most significantly, Josephine documented what happened in the immediate aftermath of Thomas's death. She had arrived at the Hargrove house just hours after the incident, having received a single white rose delivered by messenger, their prearranged signal for emergency. "I found Eleanor washing her hands with such care," she recorded. The silver piece lay disassembled on her dressing table. She worked methodically, cleaning each part as though performing a ritual. She spoke not of Thomas but of Margaret, of how the child would never know fear in her own home. When the authorities arrived, Eleanor was perfectly composed, wearing her white evening gloves as we had planned. The journal confirmed our suspicion that Eleanor's actions that night were not impulsive, but carefully considered. Josephine had helped prepare the physical evidence, ensuring that gunpowder residue would be found only on Thomas's hands, not Eleanor's. The two sisters had rehearsed this scenario many times over the 4 years of Eleanor's marriage. Most revealing was Josephine's account of how the network of women expanded after Thomas's death. Eleanor used her newfound freedom not for personal comfort, but to systematize the protection of others. The millinery shop became headquarters for what Josephine called the work, a centralized operation connecting women in danger with those who could offer safe passage. "The roses are Eleanor's inspiration," Josephine wrote. She says they survive when cut, root easily in new soil, and thrive where they should not. So too must we. The final pages of the journal described how Josephine and Eleanor developed their code system using the preserved wedding roses. The silver particles embedded in the petals would react to certain chemicals, revealing hidden messages when needed. This method allowed them to communicate across borders without raising suspicion, disguising resistance as feminine sentimentality, pressed flowers that functioned as secure messages. The journal ended with a passage dated 1952, shortly after Eleanor's death. "The silver piece returns to the earth with her, but the roses continue. They will bloom when needed, where needed. The work remains unfinished." As we concluded our research, we understood that Eleanor's story was never meant to be fully revealed, only enough to be recognized by those who needed its message. The photograph had served its purpose, not just as documentation of resistance, but as an enduring signal across time that survival sometimes requires invisible weapons and silent conspiracies of care. In our final examination of Eleanor's wedding photograph, we collaborated with Dr. Victoria Chen, pioneer in object memory research, a controversial field studying whether physical items can retain energetic imprints of their histories. Using specialized equipment that measures electromagnetic fluctuations, Dr. Chen documented unusual patterns emanating from both the photograph and the preserved derringer. "These readings are unlike anything I've encountered," she noted, studying the data. "The resonance between these two objects suggests they're still connected across physical space, continuing to communicate in ways our science can't fully explain. This connection manifested most dramatically during the winter solstice of 2025, when museum staff discovered fresh white rose petals scattered beneath Eleanor's photograph, though the display case remained sealed and surveillance footage showed no disturbance. Simultaneously, caretakers at her gravesite reported the roses blooming there despite freezing temperatures, an impossibility by conventional botanical understanding. What science cannot explain, perhaps human testimony can illuminate. During our public symposium on Eleanor's legacy, 12 women from different states approached us independently, each carrying a pressed white rose petal in vintage lockets or prayer books. Each shared a similar story. In moments of grave danger within their homes, they had experienced a specific sensation, the scent of roses followed by sudden clarity about what action to take. "It was like someone whispering instructions," explained Maria Gonzalez, who fled an abusive husband in 1998. "I knew exactly which documents to grab, which road to take, where help would be waiting." I'd never heard of Eleanor Winters before today, but I've kept this rose petal for 27 years, not understanding why it felt so important. The photograph's power isn't supernatural but deeply human, the concentrated intention of women across generations creating a resonant field of knowledge that continues to transmit its message. Resistance is possible, escape is achievable, and you are not alone. Eleanor's wedding portrait reminds us that history is not simply what's documented in official records, but what persists in objects passed hand to hand, in stories whispered behind closed doors, in knowledge preserved when public expression was impossible. The weapon beneath her flower speaks not just of her personal survival strategy, but of women's collective refusal to disappear. As our investigation concludes, we understand that Eleanor never intended her story to be completely unveiled. The partially visible derringer was precisely the point, a message meant to reveal itself only to those with eyes to see it, while remaining invisible to those who would destroy it. The white roses continue to bloom at Eleanor's grave through impossible winters. The silver derringer maintains its inexplicable condition. The photograph reveals different aspects of itself depending on who views it. Science strains to explain these phenomena, but perhaps the simplest explanation is also the truest. Eleanor Winters. Hargrove's determination to protect herself and others transcended her lifetime, embedding itself in physical objects that continue her work. In that silver derringer beneath white roses, she created something that endures. Not just a weapon, but a beacon that still guides those in darkness toward light. What ultimately distinguishes Eleanor's story from mere folklore is the physical evidence that remains, tangible proof of women's resistance that could have been so easily destroyed or dismissed. The wedding photograph survived because it appeared, to those who held power, as nothing more alarming than a bride with flowers. The truth hidden in plain sight became its protection. In 2027, during renovation of the old courthouse where Thomas Hargrove Sr. once wielded his influence, workers discovered a sealed wall cavity containing hundreds of case files, domestic violence complaints that had been systematically removed from official records between 1890 and 1920. Among them were 3 separate reports filed by Eleanor during her marriage, each dismissed without investigation. The most damning document was a medical examination dated just 10 days before Thomas's death, detailing Eleanor's injuries consistent with attempted strangulation and blunt force trauma. The examining physician had noted, "Patient expresses fear for her life and that of her child." This report had been removed from hospital records and sealed away with the others, evidence of a systematic burying of women's testimony. Alongside these documents was something extraordinary, a detailed ledger kept by a court clerk named Martha Simmons, meticulously recording every dismissed case and the reasons given. In the margins, in nearly microscopic handwriting, she had added the true circumstances and connections that led to dismissal. Judge Harrington dines weekly with accused's father, or complainant's testimony dismissed due to Sheriff Wilson's business partnership with accused. Martha Simmons had created a shadow record of injustice, hidden where it could not be destroyed. More remarkably, she had developed her own notation system identifying women at highest risk, marking their files with a small flower symbol, the same symbol that appeared in Eleanor's millinery business ledgers and Beatrice Crane's photographer's notes. This discovery confirmed what we had long suspected. The network of women protecting each other extended beyond social circles into the very institutions designed to deny them justice. Women working as clerks, nurses, telephone operators, and secretaries, positions rendering them nearly invisible to the men who held power, had created an underground communication system, identifying those in danger and connecting them with potential saviors. The white roses, the silver derringer, the protection sigils, these were merely the visible elements of a vast, sophisticated resistance operation that functioned beneath the surface of proper society. What appeared to be disconnected incidents or supernatural phenomena were actually the carefully maintained mechanisms of women who understood that survival sometimes required becoming ghosts within the machinery of their own oppression. Eleanor's wedding photograph, with its partially concealed weapon, was never meant as a personal statement, but as an entry point into this hidden system, a declaration that she saw clearly the danger before her and refused to face it unarmed or alone. The truth she preserved in that image was not just her own story, but evidence of women's refusal to disappear even when every official record tried to erase them. As Eleanor's story emerged from the shadows of history, it catalyzed changes far beyond academic interest. Law schools across the country integrated her case into their domestic violence curriculum, examining how legal systems fail vulnerable populations and how unofficial networks arise to fill these gaps. Harvard Law School established the Eleanor Winters Fellowship for students researching historical injustice and community-based protection systems. More profound was the impact on forensic photography. The National Archive initiated the Hidden in Plain Sight project, re-examining historical photographs with modern technology to uncover deliberately concealed evidence of resistance. Within 2 years, researchers identified 27 additional wedding portraits from 1880 to 1930 containing concealed weapons, escape money, or coded symbols, each representing a woman who refused victimhood while outwardly conforming to societal expectations. Museums reported troubling reactions when displaying these images together. Security cameras captured visitors, overwhelmingly women, leaving small offerings before the photographs: keys, white flowers, silver thimbles. One visitor collapsed in tears before Eleanor's portrait, later explaining she had recognized her great-grandmother in another photograph from the collection, a woman whose accident-prone husband had similarly died under mysterious circumstances. Perhaps most significant was the impact on contemporary domestic violence response. Women's shelters across New England began receiving anonymous donations, accompanied by pressed white rose petals. Crisis counselors reported an uptick in what they termed Eleanor decisions, women choosing strategic resistance rather than immediate flight, documenting abuse while planning careful exits rather than dangerous escapes. The silver derringer itself sparked controversy when ballistics experts published findings suggesting the weapon could not have fired the shot that killed Thomas Hargrove from the distance described in official reports. This revelation prompted the Massachusetts State Police to formally reopen the case in 2029, more than a century after Thomas's death, ultimately reclassifying it from accidental discharge to justifiable homicide under duress, posthumously recognizing Eleanor's legal right to self-defense. Communities connected to the network began acknowledging these histories publicly. The town of Berkshire established a memorial garden, where women from Eleanor's protection network had once operated a safe house. The planting consisted entirely of white roses propagated from cuttings taken from Eleanor's grave, roses that gardeners reported could not be completely removed once established, their roots extending deeper than seemed possible for such plants. Most poignantly, 8 great-granddaughters of women connected to Eleanor's network came forward with silver items preserved through generations: thimbles, hairpins, buttons, each containing microscopic amounts of metal from the original derringer, reforged by jewelers who left no records of their work. These objects had been passed mother to daughter with variations of the same message: keep this close when dark days find you. The photograph of Eleanor Winters Hargrove, with its hidden derringer beneath pristine wedding flowers, now represents more than historical curiosity. It stands as physical evidence of an unwritten history: how women created safety when legal structures offered none, how they communicated across time through objects and symbols, and how resistance often wore the mask of perfect compliance. In the silver light of dawn, museum conservator Lily Chen carefully unlatches the custom archival case, housing Eleanor's wedding photograph. Today marks the final day of the exhibition's world tour before the image returns to permanent climate-controlled storage, a necessary precaution to preserve its increasingly delicate emulsion. "It's strange," Lily confides to her assistant. "I've worked with thousands of historical photographs, but none that seem so aware of being observed." The wedding portrait's journey through time has been remarkable, not just for what it revealed about Eleanor and her network, but for how it continued affecting lives long after everyone connected to its creation had passed away. Throughout its exhibition in 37 countries, museum staff documented consistent phenomena: the scent of roses where no flowers were present, unexplained cold spots near the display, and, most notably, women in crisis situations being inexplicably drawn to the photograph without knowing its history. In Delhi, a young bride contemplating suicide found herself standing before Eleanor's image for hours, later reporting a sudden clarity about leaving her abusive marriage. In São Paulo, a domestic violence prosecutor changed her entire approach to evidence collection after studying the concealed derringer. In Cairo, a collective of women artisans began incorporating tiny protective symbols into their textiles after viewing the exhibition, creating modern garments with hidden pockets based on Eleanor's wedding dress designs. Most remarkable was the case of Diana Winters, a 23-year-old law student who discovered her previously unknown connection to Eleanor through genealogical research. Despite having no prior knowledge of her ancestor, Diana had independently developed a system for helping friends escape dangerous relationships, using white flowers as signals and secure digital networks instead of pressed rose petals. The knowledge seems to flow through bloodlines even when the stories don't. observed Dr. Whitaker during her final interview before retirement. It's as though the determination to protect transcends conventional inheritance. On this final exhibition day, Lily allows herself the conservator's greatest indulgence, removing her gloves to feel the actual texture of the photograph's surface. The museum is empty, security cameras briefly disabled for system maintenance. As her fingertip makes contact with the century-old image, she gasps. For just a moment, the photograph feels warm, like living skin rather than paper and chemicals. "I felt it too the first time," comes a voice from the doorway. Margaret Hargrove's last living granddaughter stands leaning on a carved ivory cane, her 90 years carried with remarkable dignity. Grandmother said the photograph was never just an image, but a door. As the elderly woman approaches, she extends her hand. In her palm lies a single silver button, small and unassuming. "The last piece," she explains. "The Derringer was melted down decades ago, transformed into 17 different objects carried by 17 different women. This is the final one. I've kept it until I found the right guardian." She presses the button into Lily's palm. The work continues, just differently now. Eleanor wouldn't have wanted her methods preserved unchanged, only her purpose. Every generation must find its own silver pieces, its own white roses. As they stand together before the photograph, both women notice something impossible. For a brief moment, Eleanor's expression seems to soften into the faintest smile, a silent acknowledgement across time that her message continues to reach those who need it most. The passage of time has done little to diminish the power of Eleanor's photograph. If anything, the distance of years has only sharpened its message, like light focused through a lens until it becomes capable of igniting what it touches. The white roses that continue their impossible blooming have spread beyond Eleanor's grave, appearing now at sites connected to her network. Windowsills of former safe houses, the foundations of the millinery shop long since converted to other purposes, the courthouse steps where women's testimonies were once systematically dismissed. Botanists remain baffled by their resilience and genetic stability. "These shouldn't be able to propagate this way," explained Dr. Ella Winters, no relation to Eleanor, though she smiles at the coincidence of names. "Rose genetics naturally diversify over generations through cross-pollination. These maintain perfect genetic consistency with the original 1912 specimens. It's as though they exist in a state of perpetual present, neither evolving nor declining. What began as historical research has evolved into something more profound, a living archive sustained not just through documents and artifacts, but through continuing practice. Women still press rose petals between important papers. Silver objects of protection are still crafted from melted-down heirlooms. The methods have modernized. Encrypted messaging apps instead of flower symbols in business ledgers, discrete GPS trackers instead of derringers, but the essential purpose remains unchanged. Perhaps most significant is what Dr. Whitaker discovered in her final analysis before retirement. Eleanor's network wasn't actually extraordinary for its time. What makes it appear exceptional is simply that we have evidence of its existence. Similar systems of women's protection likely operated in every community, every era, their traces deliberately erased or disguised as something else entirely. This reframing of history has prompted scholars across disciplines to re-examine seemingly mundane feminine objects, recipe collections that contain coded warnings about dangerous men, quilting patterns that mapped safe routes out of towns, seemingly decorative embroidery that carried messages comprehensible only to those who knew the key. What appeared to be mere domestic arts now reveal themselves as sophisticated communication systems operating beneath patriarchal oversight. Tomorrow, Eleanor's photograph will return to climate-controlled storage, but its work continues. The image has been scanned at the highest possible resolution, examined through every spectrum of light, analyzed by artificial intelligence for patterns invisible to the human eye. Yet something in it remains fundamentally unreachable by technology, a quality that can only be felt when standing before it. "It's the intention," explains Ruth Caldwell's granddaughter, now carrying forward her family's connection to Eleanor's legacy. All these women poured their determination into objects that would outlive them. The photograph, the roses, the silver pieces. They knew they might not survive to see justice in their lifetimes, but they created vessels to carry their resistance forward until the world was ready to receive it. As we prepare for the photograph's final public viewing, we understand that Eleanor's story isn't ending but transforming, like the silver derringer melted down and reforged into new tools of protection. The white roses will continue their impossible blooming, The photograph will continue revealing different aspects depending on who views it. And women will continue recognizing the signals hidden in plain sight, passed down through generations by those who understood that sometimes survival depends on what remains deliberately unseen. As we stand before Eleanor's photograph one final time, we witness how an image can transcend its physical form to become living testimony. The silver derringer, partially visible beneath those bridal flowers, has emerged from obscurity to take its rightful place in our understanding of women's quiet resistance across generations. Yesterday, a remarkable discovery was made. During the final conservation assessment before permanent archiving, ultraviolet imaging revealed invisible ink on the photograph's reverse side, Eleanor's own handwriting, previously undetectable, becoming visible only after more than a century had passed. Her message was simple. To those who seek safety, look to the roses. To those who cause harm, remember that not all weapons are visible. This morning, as the photograph was carefully sealed in its archival housing, conservation specialists reported that the scent of roses briefly filled the laboratory, though no flowers were present. Instruments recorded a momentary fluctuation in electromagnetic fields surrounding the image, neither the first nor likely the last inexplicable phenomenon associated with Eleanor's legacy. The story of this 1912 wedding portrait reminds us that history is not a fixed narrative but a living dialogue between past and present. While Eleanor Winters Hargrove never called herself a revolutionary, her deliberate choice to partially reveal her means of protection transformed a private act of survival into a beacon for others. Today, domestic violence shelters across New England still report the occasional appearance of white roses at their doorsteps, delivered by no identifiable hand. Women in crisis situations still describe moments of sudden clarity about how to secure critical documents or create safety plans. Legal advocates still invoke Eleanor's name when arguing for expanded self-defense protections. Perhaps most telling is what happened last month at the site of Eleanor's former millinery shop. During construction work, laborers uncovered a sealed metal box containing 17 silver buttons, identical to the one Margaret's granddaughter gave to Lily Chen. Each button was wrapped in silk embroidered with a different woman's initials, suggesting that Eleanor's network was far more extensive than even our research had uncovered. These buttons have been reunited with the derringer's silver, not in a museum display, but distributed among modern organizations continuing Eleanor's work. They serve as tangible reminders that protection sometimes requires concealment, that resistance often wears the mask of conformity, and that the most powerful weapons aren't always the most visible. As we close this investigation, we understand that Eleanor's photograph was never meant to be completely decoded, only enough of its message revealed to guide those who needed its wisdom. The partially concealed derringer beneath pristine bridal flowers remains what Eleanor intended, a warning to those who would cause harm and a promise to those seeking protection that they are not alone in their struggle. The white roses will continue their impossible blooming. The silver will continue its transition into new forms of protection. And women will continue to recognize the signals hidden in plain sight by those who understood that survival sometimes depends on what others cannot see. Another photograph, another dark secret revealed. Until next time, this has been Shadow Frames.